It's
Here it
it's
is.
being live streamed. Preparing, setting up meeting for Facebook Live. That little bar is taking forever, but it says it's live. I'm going to pretend we're live. You know, I keep waiting for that little bar to finish, but I don't know if it's finished. And I think it finished just now. So hi, my name is Veronica Monet, and I would like to welcome you to the Shame-Free Zone. We are going to have a really sexy conversation today, and hopefully a very empowering one. I have with me today my special new friend and colleague, Dr. Vivien Monroe. She is an expert on Lilith. As a matter of fact, she's going to be launching a class about Lilith in just, well, on the 21st. I'm not sure how many days that is from now. I guess that's about 15 days from now. No pressure or anything, Vivien.
No, none at all.
But I'm going to introduce Vivien so you know a little bit about her. But before I do, I just want you to know we've got 3 really juicy topics we're going to cover today. We're going to take a deep dive into the goddess Lilith and see how that can benefit your own sovereignty, especially your sexual sovereignty. We're also going to be talking about sacred prostitution, something that I engaged in for 14 years plus. And we're going to be talking about something I know very little bit about, but I can't wait to learn about. And that is something that Dr. Vivien knows about, women's secret history of being oracles. So much to cover today. But first, let me tell you a little bit about my good friend, Dr. Monroe. She is an author, an educator, a priestess of the divine feminine, of course. She's also an intuitive and a channel with decades of study on the topics of spirituality, mysticism, and personal growth. She is passionate about helping women tap into their reservoirs of inner power, honor their intuitive wisdom, and unapologetically live life on their own terms. So resonant with me, as you know. Vivien found this path after spending years working in the corporate and educational sectors. She was a chronic overachiever and felt that the only way to succeed was through masculine ways of doing and being, i.e., competition, pushing through, working harder and longer. She was out from her inner feminine, which resulted in increase or cut off. I'm sorry. She was cut off from her inner feminine. Oh my God, we're all cut off from our inner feminine, aren't we?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And that resulted in fatigue, anxiety, and even clinical depression. I mean, how many can relate to this? And through her spiritual work, she learned to integrate her feminine and masculine aspects. That's why I have that yin-yang symbol on my website. A focus on bringing balance through supporting the feminine is woven into her work with clients using both her intuitive wisdom and rigorous critical thinking and organizational approach. And she's a regular speaker at conferences and events for women, including the American Academy of Religions, the Association for the Study of Women in Mythology, and Faith and Feminism. No surprise there. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Shame-Free Zone, Dr. Vivien Monroe.
I really appreciate you having me here. I am delighted that we have connected, and I'm really excited to engage in this juicy conversation with you today.
As am I. You know, Lilith has been a very sacred fixture in my life for quite some time. It's funny, I was just dialoguing with a male identified client who's going into Lilith and finding a lot of healing for past sexual abuse around that. I think it's beautiful to use her presence in that way. I myself have used Lilith as a role model for being bold and sometimes brazen, and certainly out and open and powerful and you know, sexually sovereign. And you know what that means to me is that I stand in my own sexual desires, and I love when I was reading your description of your soon to be released class on Lilith. You're talking about how, you know, it's not about being an object of desire, but to actually have your desire. And in the class that I was just teaching, which you attended on Saturday, one of the things that I was sharing with one of the people that attended to that class was that even when we talk about things like penis vagina sex, that our cultural reference around that is so much about wet and willing. I remember having my book agent, or actually I think it was the editor from Penguin, tried to get me to put that into my book, Sex Secrets of Escorts. He wanted me to say something about wet and willing. He was very upset that I said something about having a rock hard clitoris. I was like, okay, are you a sexist much? So, but we have to get past those ideas, and even when it comes to the vagina, for people who have vaginas, it's not about it being wet and willing. It's about it being puffy and desirous.
Yes.
So we got a lot of culture to shift here today, and I want to start by asking you, why Lilith? What's your draw to her?
Oh, so good. It's not necessarily an intellectual answer. I was working on my master's degree, and one of my professors had written a book called Lilith's Fire, and I read it and was instantly hooked. It was just my whole being was screaming yes. Like I know her, I love her, I need her, yes. And as I was reading through the book, I mean, there were several parts where I just started weeping, and for me it was tears of truth. It was finally hearing things that I had known but had no words for, and it's a huge amount of permission giving, of just, Lilith is so outside of the good girl box and being quiet and submissive and pliant. And so to see this figure who's fierce, who knows what she wants, she knows how to ask for it, she doesn't compromise, who's willing to live on her terms. And one of the biggest pieces for me was that she refused to abandon herself. And that was a pattern that I have experienced for so much of my life. And to see a role model of, no, like I stand by me, for me, first and foremost, was hugely revelatory and healing. And then just from there, I continued to fall in love with her.
Well, and Lilith's Fire has a foreword by a mutual friend of ours who has passed on, Cozy Fabian.
Yes.
And Cozy Fabian is actually the person who introduced me to the goddess Lilith. I didn't know about her until I met Cozy, and that was in 1990. And her poem, Lilith's Liturgy, one of my favorite lines from it was, whose sexual fire was too hot for God.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And you knew Cozy for a while. Did you, anything you want to share about that? Just what it was like for you to work with her?
Oh, Cozy was just so dynamic and such an amazing combination of intellect and ferocity and creativity, like just this artist in so many ways, and just erotically in touch. And for me, the eroticism was the eroticism of life, just this live wire that she was. She was just amazing.
Yeah. I miss her and I love her, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of her writings out into the world. I know you and I are working on that with other people like Carol Queen. So this is actually how you and I met.
Yes.
Was in her passing, because we met after the memorial. Yeah, which I presented liturgy for Lilith at the memorial. Yeah, and I'm just so glad. It almost felt like, in some ways, Lilith and Inanna and all the other goddesses that Cozy was so fond of. It's like working through her to bring you and I together.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes, and then you got me reunited with a friend of mine who will remain nameless because she loves her privacy, but somebody I hadn't talked to for about 10 years. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful what happens when women step into their feminine power and support each other.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Now, there is an awful lot of talk about sex trafficking. And then we have the other camp, which talks about sex worker rights. I have often been on that side, working to try to change laws and public perceptions. And we'll probably die as sex worker rights activists. But sacred prostitution is something that's really confusing for people. And I remember even reading a book about sacred prostitution where the author felt very strongly that there is no such thing as sacred prostitution today, that it would be impossible for it to exist because it's been co-opted by the patriarchy. And we don't have to get into the weeds of that political discourse if that's not, near and dear to your heart. But I really love to hear what sacred prostitution means to you and what it is that you share in your coursework about that.
Yes. Well, one story that I feel illustrates a piece of sacred prostitution is actually from Sumerian mythology. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, was being awful to his people. And so in response to complaints from the citizens, a goddess creates this man named Enkidu. And he's described as abundantly hairy and primitive and lives roaming with the herds and grazing and drinking from rivers with the beasts. So he ends up causing problems for someone else who asks for help and, to deal with this wild man. So the king sends Shamhat, who is a sacred prostitute. She seduces and teaches Enkidu, and after 2 weeks with her, he becomes human, intelligent, and understands words, is literate and a functioning member of society. So for me, that's a really brief, beautiful example of one of the ways that sacred prostitution works. It's this healing process. It's a transformational process. I mean, sex in itself is so vital and powerful and an avenue to immediate awakening, opening, unity consciousness. And sacred prostitution, it takes someone who's in that, who's aware of those different levels, who for me is another form of a healer. And there's so much vulnerability, wounding, and hurt that can be held and healed within those sacred sexual rites and activities and witnessing and holding. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So
it is. And, it's difficult for people in Western culture sometimes to understand this particular ideology or framework, because Rachel Wanton produced a gorgeous film about sacred prostitution, probably 10 years ago, something like that. And she came to America to tour and promote her film. And I think it's called The Red Road. I'd have to look it up. Thank God I remember her name, Rachel Wanton, from Australia. She gets to the United States and people are coming to her film screening and they're like so moved. They're in tears. They're watching these women bring sex to men who are in wheelchairs, men who have multiple sclerosis, men who have colostomy bags, men who are mentally and emotionally not really capable of functioning in society, but their parent guardian has said, I want my son to experience sex, and they're, somewhere in their 30s by this point. And it's beautiful. The women actually have trainings about how to work with various different disabilities. and the compassion and the love that they bring and the healing that this brings for the men that they're working with. Nobody, when people ask her, well, you know, what are you? And she says that she was a prostitute, and they go, no, oh no, you're not a prostitute. You must be a nurse or something. She actually called me up and was pissed off and said, you have to educate Americans. I've been trying. I really have been trying, Rachel. But the whole idea that is just, we can't understand how this word prostitution could be associated with something sacred, let alone something healing. Yeah. And the way I understand the history, and maybe you understand it differently, I know you've done more research than I have. I get all my information from Cozy. Yes. And Barbara Walker's big encyclopedia of women's lost history. But the way my understanding of it was that originally this is the seat of religion and goddess cultures. So the temples were full of priestesses, and they weren't all just women, but they were in service to the goddess, and that involved sex as well. The separation that we get between worship and sex really occurs with patriarchal monotheism. So I'd love to get your take on that and hear more about that history as you have researched it.
Yes. So pre-patriarchy, there was a much more inclusive and embracing attitude towards the body, sex, sexuality, even gender. Like, it was far bigger. And for example, some of the priests and priestesses of Inanna, there were transgender priests and priestesses. You know, they were required to dress as the opposite gender in her service. And so there was just a lot more openness than what came to be. And yes, so sex was one of those things that was also not as shamed. And there were some priestesses who, yes, served the goddess through their sexual practices. And Herodotus speaks of one area he went into where every single girl, before she could get married, had to go and sit on the steps of the temple and sleep with at least one stranger. And that was her act of service to the goddess. And it was providing the man an opportunity to experience the goddess through her and through their connection. And it was the full, you know, the goddess through her priestesses accepting anyone and everyone as they are, like this complete inclusive acceptance. And, you know, that can be a beautiful practice in and of itself. And it's not every goddess, it's not every temple, it's not every priestess. It wasn't across the board, you know, it was certain places. And there's also still a lot of academic controversy about, you know, how different researchers interpret the texts and what was really going on. But that's one of the pieces that were put forward. But we also know in Sumerian times, for the New Year festival, the king would sleep with the high priestess because she would be the stand-in for the goddess to confer kingship on him. He could not call himself king and rule without the goddess's blessing. And that was done through their sacred marriage, Hieros Gamos. And that was done every year. And so it's another integration of this, you know, sexual engagement for something sacred and much bigger. And also, I also just want to name that what we've been talking about right now has been very heteronormative, cisgendered, and I'm not intending to exclude anyone. I'm just speaking of the text and the records that we have, which are referencing male and female engagement, but it's, you know, that's not all it is. And especially in today, when we're reimagining or recreating our sacred sexual work, we can bring back in all people, all bodies, all of it.
Yes, we can. History is something we can access to understand where we came from, and then make our own adult decisions about where we want to go.
Yeah.
I think, and most history is not only heteronormative, but tends to have a Caucasian bias as well.
Mhm.
So, although we're not actually talking about necessarily Caucasian cultures right now, which also, so for me, being raised in a doomsday Christian cult, I read the Bible from cover to cover when I was 12, and I actually can find in the Bible, so cover to cover means all of the Old Testament. That means every damn one of the begets. It took 1 year from age 12 to 13. But what I know from having studied the Bible is that, and I also had to study it in church and memorize verses on flashcards. So it wasn't just one off there. I mean, it was with me most of my life. There is a lot of reference actually to these sacred sexual rites and sacred priestess temples. And some references in the Old Testament are about going to the high places and pulling down the trees and their altars. And the abomination between the in front of the monotheistic God, the abomination was the sexual rituals and initiations that these cultures practiced. And particularly that they were female centric in a lot of ways. So that's why I think by the time you get to Revelations, there's so much talk about killing the great whore of Babylon. So,
Yeah.
So the idea is, and that's a book that's 6,000 years old. So it's really about trying to inculcate us with a lot of suspicion and animosity towards these ancient indigenous cultures, which were mostly victims of genocide in the Bible.
Yeah.
And for me, a lot of my journey has been like reclaiming that and going, hey, wait a second, there was actually something beautiful taking place in these cultures that's been lost. Do you see it that way? And I don't know how you feel about the fact that I just brought the Bible into this conversation.
Well, no, I think it is good to recognize it as a historical document and to engage in critical analysis of who's writing it, why are they writing it, why do they say what they say, what are they not saying, and why are they not saying it? Because it is, like all historical documents, it is trying to shape a certain reality and what people perceive. And especially when the alternative versions of, the other voices, when the other voices have been erased and we don't have them speaking up, talking about what their reality was, then all we're left with is this biased account with its own opinion and agenda. So yeah, I just.
Yeah, and to me, it's pretty evident that the demonization, quite literally, we'll talk about that in a minute, the demonization of sacred prostitution as it existed 6,000 years ago was in service of justifying genocide of people of color. So I want to call that out. And hopefully help the viewers. There's most people don't actually embrace every word of the Bible. That's why they're not, offering their children as a human sacrifice to God, things like that, or stoning adulterers. So hopefully even people who like the Bible are not too offended, because I'm not indicting, like the Gospels. But I would like us to question how we got the programming that sex is either for pair bonding or procreation, but it's not about our creativity, our personal power, and even being able to heal emotions and physical even. I mean, sex is such a beautiful, beautiful elixir for almost anything that ails us.
Yeah.
But just what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I agree. And this is part of what drew me into women's spirituality, is unearthing women's voices, women's perspectives, the women-centered practices around embodiment, sensuality, sexuality, that the body is not dirty or sinful or shameful, that we need to get out of and get to like this other heavenly place, but it's all sacred and it's all here and it's in everything. It's, yeah.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that, because to me, I do remember past lives, and I believe that there's something as called a soul.
Mhm.
And for me, it's fascinating to choose to incarnate in a physical body, because one of the things then that things like sex and meditation can do for us is help us get out of the body.
Mhm.
But a lot of times the meditation practices are so much about trying to get you out of your lower chakras and into your upper chakras. And one of the things that I love about tantric principles is oftentimes it's more about circulating those energies through the
Mhm.
chakras, so that we don't actually create a hierarchy where the lower chakra is considered denigrated, lower as
Right.
in denigrated, but that's actually the root. It's just the root chakra, and it's got all this beautiful kundalini energy. And as you learn to push it up out through all of your chakras, particularly if you do that during sex, there can be this beautiful moment where you actually do leave your body.
Mhm.
And it's very ecstatic, it's very rejuvenating. And you may merge with your partner, you might merge with the divine, you might merge with all of the above. So it's kind of a fascinating thing for me. And I sometimes think that this information's been suppressed, because then maybe we wouldn't need a church and a preacher, because we'd be
Right.
accessing the divine on our own.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. No mediator, especially if we recognize our own divinity and us as an expression, as a creative expression and embodiment, then yeah, we're all we need.
Yeah. Well, so I know that you have an amazing, beautiful school. This is where the class on Lilith is coming. You got some other things in there, like badass whores and stuff like that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we go into women's oracular history?
Sure.
Okay.
So yes, I'm creating and constantly growing. It's going to be a living entity. My women's mystery school, which is a resource of women's sacred stories, sacred voices, sacred practices, sacred embodiment, the divine in feminine form, the feminine face of the sacred. And so there's a variety of opportunities for community education, personal growth. For example, home study courses, the first one on Lilith, and there will be a home study course, Introduction to Women's Spirituality, which is, what is that? How is it different from regular spirituality? What is the divine feminine? So just a exploration into what this is. Yes, a course on well, the heroine's descent, which is a different framing. A lot of people are very familiar with the hero's quest, the hero's myth, and how, the hero goes out and does and conquers and achieves. And the heroine, through looking at different stories, either the Persephone myth, or let's look at Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole, or Dorothy getting swept up in a tornado. For the heroine's journey, a lot of it is us being grabbed and taken down and into the underworld, which is a sacred realm of the goddess, which was also, set up as scary and bad. And, we want to separate ourselves as much as possible from the death, the dark, the shadow. So of course, talking about that and what our journey is. And another course, Badass Bitches and Whores, Goddesses of Love, Sex, and War. So
I love
yes,
that title.
I love saying it. Yeah. And so there'll be live group programs, recorded home studies, monthly drop-in coaching, and different circles and moon circles, and a resource to pull together teachers of multiple traditions and expertise. So again, it's a central resource for women to explore and question and find what their path is for them without being told what it is.
That's a beautiful website, by the way.
Thank you.
And I'm going to be taking your class on Lilith, so I can't wait.
Yay.
So let's go ahead and talk about oracles. I'll start off just by saying the only thing I know about the oracles is the Oracle of Delphi and what I thought that I knew about that. And I think maybe you're going to help nuance this and help me be a little more educated around this topic. I thought that they were the Sacred Prostitution priestesses, and the king had to get the go-ahead from the oracle, especially the Oracle of Delphi, before he could even go to war. And I thought that he might have been legitimizing himself as being the king by having sex and progeny with the oracle. But I have a beautiful print framed in my dining room of the Oracle of Delphi.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so this would be another goddess that's really special to me, but I can't wait to hear the truth about her.
Yes. Well, I love the Oracle at Delphi. I actually wrote my dissertation on it. So there's about 300 pages just for me personally talking about it, which obviously I can't cover in our conversation. In my research, I didn't uncover any sacred sexual practices that were happening there, but the priestess, who was known as the Pythia, was really politically instrumental. Kings, emperors, generals would all go and see her before taking major action. So if they wanted to colonize a certain area, they'd go and say, okay, is this going to be favorable? Is this going to work out well? Should I do this? Should I instigate war against this person? Should I broker peace with this person? How should we respond to the attack we're under? What should we do in war? And there's some speculation that some of the parts of the Constitution of Sparta actually came from the mouth of the Pythia at the Delphic Oracle. And so she definitely had political influence and sway, which is huge considering that in ancient Greek times, women had zero status and respect. I mean, they were just property. They were treated so awful. Sometimes couldn't even leave their home. And what's interesting is women were not even allowed to consult the oracle at Delphi.
Wow.
But yet it's a woman priestess sitting there channeling a god to advise kings and generals on their political and military campaigns. So I get a little amused by that. But yeah, she has a very long history, and there was an oracle operating on that site at least as far back as 1500 BC.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah.
And what you just said there, were the other women were not allowed to consult with the Oracle of Delphi. That really hit home with me because I was thinking about this whole whore Madonna complex that our culture is from today. And the ways in which good women are separated out from bad women. So
yes,
got a class, bitches and whores and badass women are basically granted in some ways honorary male status so that they can grab onto economic power. They can own property. They can go to college. We see this with the courtesans of old.
Yes.
Only women that were allowed to debate men publicly.
Yes.
Or fence with them.
Or be educated.
Yes. Or to get an education, to even know how to read a book.
Yes.
But the price that they paid for being able to take on that power was that they were shunned by quote unquote good society. So while they were working at the seats of power as advisors, mentors, and muses for some of the most powerful men in the land, they were not considered appropriate wife material. And so we already see this split, and it happens culturally before it starts happening inside of us subconsciously. But I think now we have the split subconsciously embedded in us.
Yes.
And this is why I think history is so important, so that we can start to understand that what feels like normal or the way it's always been is not.
Yeah. And not just understanding history, but a critical examination of history. Again, going back to who's writing this account. What is their agenda in writing it? What are they not saying? Because written history is subjective. It is not objective.
Well, and I see this around Mary Magdalene from the Bible too. People fighting. We've got feminists who are saying, and by the way, I consider myself a feminist. There are feminists who don't think I am one, but I know I am. But some feminists will argue that the only reason we think she was a prostitute is because patriarchy wants to denigrate any woman who has power or influence. And I get where they're coming from. But as a sexual rights activist and a former prostitute myself, I want to say, well, yes, but why would you see any woman, regardless of how she makes a living, in monolithic terms? Why can't she be complex? Why can't she be intelligent and accomplished? And that's for me is very painful, because then that extends out into why we still don't have full human rights for sex workers today. Yeah. But and this may be out of your field of study. I don't know if you have any opinions about the history of Mary Magdalene.
I did not focus on the Christian traditions, but I do know that there are a lot of debates on exactly everywhere from she was a trained priestess from the Egyptian mystery schools and was partnered equally with Jesus. And that's why she could anoint him. That's why she was went to the tomb to wash his body, because she was partner, wife, priestess, and held the feminine half of his teachings. And, so there's that all the way up to, no, she was a prostitute and she was a sinner and she's just, a side note.
Right. Never mind the fact that she has gospels that were never put in the Bible. Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I want to ask you something. I've been out there politically and publicly now for, I'd say, 30 years. And I've sometimes gotten into trouble for some of the things that I say. How's it going for you?
We'll see. This is, launching this school is my stepping into visibility and publicity and speaking things that are not going to be, warmly accepted by all.
Oh, did I get to pop your cherry today?
Yes.
Yay for me.
Thank you, Veronica. And I know I couldn't have been in better hands.
Oh, so you had to come to the Sacred Prostitute.
Exactly. Yeah, but this is, we'll see what happens. And there's also a lot of trauma around it. And I know a lot of women who are also entrepreneurs who have trauma around greater visibility, because there is this generational, encoded DNA trauma, as well as within our family, as well as, within past lives of women who are seen are attacked, throughout, look at all the women who have been demonized. They're women with power. They're women who speak up. They're women who don't just go along with, what they're told or, take orders. And so, and that very real threat and safety instinct gets triggered in a lot of us as we start stepping forward more and saying more of just, okay, like it's
Oh, yeah.
coming.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's something to work through.
I have lots of female identified clients who have a vague memory that they were probably burned at the stake in a past life. And for myself, I remember being thrown to a den of lions. But so it's, and I was a temple priestess when that happened. So there's a way in which I took a belly dancing class and she was teaching us a move, and my body was like communicating to my brain, you can get killed for moving like that. And so just, I mean, I just like froze in the belly dancing class. So it's helpful to know that, yes, if you're scared, of course you are. It's in your DNA, and you don't have to believe in past lives here, because we have the study of epigenetics now. We know that trauma travels through the DNA at least 7 generations. So back there somewhere, there was probably an uppity woman who suffered, and it's in your DNA.
Right. And we witness it every day in the media with the way that different women are taken down for disagreeing, for saying no, for stepping up, for calling out, like there's a problem here. It's still happening. So, you know, it's a very legitimate concern and fear for all those who are feeling it. And it's something to work through.
Well, as somebody with who's been through it, let me pass something on to you.
Yes.
There is no substitute for standing in your personal power. And if the divine feminine is calling to you to bring information that scares people and goes against the grain and violates the norms, but really in a lot of ways, when it gets us connected to our hearts and our souls and each other, it is, I believe, one of the things that can help us turn things around so that this lovely little biosphere that we're inhabiting might actually continue to sustain life. Divine feminine's really needed right now. So when I think about that higher calling, that higher purpose, that's what helps me, you know, go through whatever I have to go through. And I'm sure you're not going to go to jail like I did.
It's young. Who knows where this road will lead? But, you know, and thank you for saying that. It also reminds me, circling back around to Lilith's story. You know, that one of, you know, there's many, she's talked about in many different places, but one of the stories is that she was the first woman in the Garden of Eden, that her and Adam were made at the same time of the same blood, clay, dust, and that Adam insisted on always being on top when they had sex. And Lilith said, no, like, I want to be on top. Like, it's my turn. And he said, no, you shall lie beneath me, and you shall always lie beneath me. And Lilith called out the secret name of God and left the Garden of Eden to go and fornicate at the Red Sea. And just bookmark, she knew the secret name of God. Then Adam got lonely and asked God, like, please bring Lilith back. And 3 angels went to bring her back. And she said, no, like, if I'm not going to be treated as the equal I am, then it's no paradise for me. Like, I will stay here and honor myself, my sovereignty. I will not abandon myself and make myself lesser than. And so they threatened her with, okay, then 100 of your demon babies will die every day, and you're going to be a demon and this and that. And so she was ostracized. She was demonized. She was maligned for choosing her needs, for standing in her own equality and the right for her to voice which she needed to. And so, again, she's been a role model for me of, don't sell myself out, like, stand in my truth, because, it hurts a lot more when I've abandoned myself and betrayed myself than if I stood in my truth and just let others be unhappy with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And bravo for your courage and your resolve and for wanting to bring this forward, because I think the timeliness is just off the charts here.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me. There's a lot of men that are wanting to get in touch with their divine feminine side as well. And I really think the planet's crying out for that and like whispering in all of our ears saying, please, please rebirth that divine feminine. You'll understand then how you're connected to nature and to all the sentient beings on this planet and how we're working together as a family.
Yes.
This is one of the things that I think is so misunderstood when we start talking about sexual healing and sacred sexuality or sacred prostitution. There's a misunderstanding that we're talking about sex as it exists in a patriarchal
Right.
right?
Right.
And sex can be a beautiful kundalini breath. So that, patriarchy started making it about penis, vagina, sex.
Yeah.
Because that was about procreation.
Right.
And that was really the only thing you were allowed to do sex for one time.
Right.
And then we rediscovered that women have clitorises. And
Yay!
women's anatomy has been lost so many times, and they lost the female prostate in the 1800s when women were going for the vote. Took us till 2003 for them to finally say, okay, y'all have a prostate. So it's stunning how politicized the female body has become. But I want to extend that out and say it's just how politicized sexuality has become, because it impacts people of all genders with any genitalia. Ways in which there is a concerted effort to separate us from our intuition, our inner knowing, our pleasure, our connection to our own authentic connection to the divine.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we haven't talked about, and I'm going to run just a little bit long if that's okay with you, because I'm really enjoying this conversation. Tell us about the oracles as it could apply to us today. When we're looking at oracular history, what I know about it so far is basically, wow, these women were powerful. They controlled the kings. They decided when we were going to war and not going to war. But what does it mean for us today?
Excellent question. And I have a couple of examples that I'd really, really love to share. For me, it's a path to our own sovereignty. And as we sort of mentioned earlier, when we have a direct connection to source or divinity or our higher wisdom, we don't need to rely on someone else to tell us, what's right, what's wrong, how to be. Like we become so much more empowered and sovereign and have agency and have a much deeper connection with all of reality, because it's all interlocked, it's huge interweb and interconnected that we can feel into beyond ourselves into the whole. And so women and their oracular abilities, they have used it for social change and social justice, which is absolutely needed for today. For example, the Pythia at the Oracle at Delphi issued manumissions. So there were more than 1,200 examples where people would come in and she would demand that their slaves be released. And the way that it worked was, okay, the temple of Apollo, like Apollo the god, is going to buy your slave from you. And now, okay, go do what you want. So it was this process of freeing slaves, and she would, someone would come to see her and she'd say, sorry, like you need to give us your slave in order for you to be all good or to get what you want or to do whatever. And so there's inscriptions of over 1,200 people that she was responsible for freeing. So that's one, political action that can happen. Another is, and please forgive my pronunciation, I don't know the exact correct way, but there is Nehanda Charwe Nayakasakani, and she was a spirit medium of the Shona people in Zimbabwe. And so she made oracular pronouncements, performed traditional ceremonies that were thought to ensure rain and good crops. She was a powerful woman and was instrumental in organizing the nationwide resistance to colonial rule in 1896 and 1897. So she helped lead this charge against colonialism. Another woman is Aline Sitwa Data, and she was a prophet and spiritual activist, born either 1920 or 1921 in the southernmost township in the French colony of Senegal. And she worked in the rice paddies as a child until she started receiving revelations. And she was told by the great supreme being to create these 2 new shrines. And she walked over and dug this hole in the sand, and water started to flow in. So she was granted the gift of being able to call in rain. And she, through her work, she created a movement that united Northern and Southern Diola, as well as neighboring ethnic groups, people from Gambia, from Portuguese Guinea. She introduced new shrines. She did amazing social justice work and championed preserving the traditional values against the colonizers, inspiring people to push back. She healed divisions between the different colonized communities, creating unity, cooperation. So again, this is a part, women's oracular work isn't just about seeing the future, speaking to spirits, but it can have real life impact with social justice, with doing what's right for all, for inclusivity, for healing, for, So for me, that's what the oracular work is needed today.
That is really inspiring. And it sounds to me like we're talking about getting in touch with your connection to the divine, getting in touch with your inner knowing. And I always think it's so important to actually be working with the divine, so that you're not just coming from a self-referential place, because we're so much bigger when we work in partnership, and we can work in partnership with each other, we can work in partnership with the planet, we can work in partnership with the divine. But I'm really hearing you talk about how we can tap into that wisdom to heal our culture, to heal the planet, to heal humans as they currently are expressing themselves, which is unfortunately always cut off, so that we are shoving people towards commercialism and greed and self-promotion, so that they don't actually get connected to the things that give them substance and help us thrive. Yeah. Well, is there anything that you wish I had asked you today?
Oh, no, I mean, you've asked and contributed such juiciness and breadth, and we could go on talking for hours. There's so much to unpack, so many threads to follow here, but this is a wonderful dive into the mystery that is, the divine feminine and women's spirituality and women's spiritual sovereignty.
Well, and you and I are going to talk a lot more over the course of the coming years. I will be putting all of your links below this interview, but for people who want to go check it out right now, do you want to just give them a couple links so they can go check out the mystery school? And
sure. Do you want me to just speak them or type them in? So the school is at womensmysteryschool.org. And so you can go and see the school there. If you sign up to become a member, membership is free. and there will always be a free tier of membership because I believe in accessibility. And behind the membership are special perks that you can't see from the public facing school. And in there, you'll find a list of the courses that are coming up and different speaking events. And for example, this Friday, I'm doing a workshop, Sex Secrets of the Goddess. So that'll be fun. And information and links are on my website. But the main one you want to know is just womensmysteryschool.org.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, as we close, I want to tell you how thrilled I am just to be your friend and to be getting to know you. And I also want to thank the Divine Feminine that orchestrated our meeting.
Yes.
Which
thank you, Cozy.
Exactly. I was just going to call out Lilith and our friend Cozy Fabian.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's been beautiful. I look forward to you and I doing this again real soon.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you inviting me to have this conversation.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Thank you, Vivien. Bye for now.
Bye.